Mr. Jason, come home now. The cook, Margaret's voice trembled on the phone. I think she's killing your mother. In the 50th floor boardroom, Jason was stunned. Killing? Tiffany said she was just a little confused. No! Margaret screamed. She flushed all her pills down the toilet. I heard Mrs. Dorothy fall. She's dying. In front of his investors, the millionaire stared at the phone, his face contorted in horror. He turned to his assistant, roaring one sentence that froze the entire boardroom. Cancel. Everything. He stormed out the door, leaving an empire to crumble. Will Jason make it in time? And what will he do when he confronts the truth? Before we continue, let us know where you're watching from. Whether you're in New York, California, Texas, or anywhere in the world, leave a comment. It's amazing to see all of us connected. Now, let's go back to the beginning to see how this tragedy began. Dorothy woke up with the world spinning around her. It wasn't the gentle dizziness of old age that sometimes visited her like an old acquaintance, but a violent storm shaking the foundations of her consciousness. The ceiling of her luxurious bedroom, with its plaster moldings imitating exotic flowers, rippled as if it were a reflection in water. A high-pitched buzzing, like a million crickets, had settled in her ears, drowning out the opulent silence of the mansion. She tried to sit up, resting an elbow on the mattress of high thread-count Egyptian cotton sheets that felt cold and alien against her skin, but an invisible force pushed her back onto the pillows. Her heart wasn't beating. It was galloping wild and erratic, a drum announcing a battle she didn't know if she could fight. With a dry mouth, she reached a trembling hand toward the polished cherry wood nightstand, a piece of furniture worth more than the entire house where she had raised her son. Her fingers, clumsy from lack of strength, groped for the plastic bottle of her blood pressure pills. It was her anchor, her promise of one more day, but her fingers found only the cold, smooth surface of the wood. She opened her eyes, forcing them to focus. The bottle wasn't there. An icy panic began to climb up her spine. She forced herself to sit up, ignoring her body's rebellion. The whole room tilted dangerously to one side. She grabbed the edge of the nightstand, breathing with difficulty. She looked inside the top drawer, desperately rummaging through embroidered handkerchiefs and a rosary. Nothing. She opened the second drawer where she kept some photos and keepsakes. It wasn't there either. That was when she saw it. The bottle was by the lamp, but knocked on its side, empty. The white cap lay a few inches away. A few little white pills should have been there. She knew it. She counted her days by those small doses of life. She could swear by the love she had for her Jason, that last night there were still enough left for a week. The confusion was a thick fog adding to the dizziness. Had she taken them? Had she forgotten that she did? The bedroom door opened without warning. Tiffany entered, not like someone visiting a sick person, but like the owner of everything in sight. She wore an emerald green designer dress that highlighted her figure and spoke of expensive lunches and afternoons of leisure. She held her cell phone glued to her ear. She was speaking in a honeyed voice that contrasted brutally with the coldness of her gaze. Of course, Jessica, the Prada one. It is absolutely adorable. I told Jason it was an investment, not a whim. Yes, I know. He doesn't understand these things. She passed by Dorothy's bed without giving her a single glance, walking toward the enormous walk-in closet. Dorothy followed her with her eyes, trying to speak, but her throat seemed full of sand. Tiffany, she managed to whisper, her voice a thread of sound almost imperceptible. Tiffany ignored her, absorbed in her conversation. See you at the country club at 1. Okay, perfect. Kisses. She hung up the phone and left it on a dresser with an elegant gesture. Only then did she deign to look at Dorothy, and her face, which had been all smiles for her friend, transformed into a mask of impatient annoyance. What do you want, Dorothy? Can't you see I'm busy? My pills, said Dorothy, pointing to the empty bottle with a finger that wouldn't stop trembling. There aren't any left. I need my medicine. Tiffany approached the bed, picked up the bottle, examined it with fake interest, and then let out a condescending little laugh, a sharp and cruel sound. Oh, mother-in-law, this again? Of course you took your medicine, don't you remember? I brought them to you myself early this morning with your kale smoothie that you like so much. You took every single one. No, that's not true, replied Dorothy, panic giving her a little strength. I haven't tasted a smoothie. I just woke up. Tiffany, please. I feel very sick. Tiffany rolled her eyes. Her patience, always scarce when it came to her mother-in-law, had run out. Look, ma'am, I'm getting a little tired of your dramas. At your age, memory fails. It's normal. Last week you swore we had stolen your blue shawl, and it was draped over the back of your chair the entire time. 2 days ago you accused me of not giving you dinner when you had eaten 2 bowls of clam chowder. Are you going to deny that too? There is no pain quite like the fear that you are losing your own mind. This kind of cruelty, hiding in plain sight, is the sharpest, and Dorothy is all alone. Or is she? We're about to see just how far Tiffany is willing to push. Every word was a stone. Dorothy didn't remember the cardigan or the soup. Was it possible? Was her mind betraying her in such a cruel way? The certainty she felt a moment ago began to dissolve, replaced by a terrifying doubt. At that instant, a young new maid named Haley timidly entered the room with a tea tray. Mrs. Dorothy, I brought you some tea, she stammered, clearly intimidated by the tense atmosphere. Leave, Haley, ordered Tiffany sharply without even looking at her. The lady is just a little confused. As always. Out. The girl, frightened, turned around and disappeared, closing the door behind her. The brief moment of possible help had vanished. They were alone again. Tiffany leaned over Dorothy, her face very close, her expensive floral perfume invading the air and turning the old woman's stomach. Listen to me well, she hissed, her voice now pure poison. Jason is very busy making the money that pays for this roof, this bed, and even the air you breathe. The last thing he needs are the complaints and fantasies of a little old lady who can no longer distinguish reality. So you are going to stay here quietly and stop inventing problems. Today I have a very important lunch with people who are actually worth it. I don't want to receive a single call from my husband because you decided to stage one of your little scenes. Is that clear? Without waiting for an answer, she straightened up, smoothed her dress, and left the room with a firm step, closing the door with a definitive click that resonated in the silence like the bolt of a prison cell. Dorothy was left alone, trembling. The dizziness was more intense than before, and now it mixed with humiliation and fear. Her eyes landed on a small, silver-framed photograph resting on the nightstand. It was Jason as a boy, wearing a school uniform that was too big for him and a smile that was missing a tooth. Her Jason, her reason for living. She pressed the photo against her chest, the cold metal against her nightgown. The tears she hadn't allowed herself to shed in front of Tiffany began to flow, hot and silent. She was crying not because of the dizziness or the pills. She was crying because for the first time she felt completely alone in the palace her son had built, a palace that had become her gilded cage. It had not happened all at once. This cruelty had been a slow poison, administered in small doses over the years. It began with subtle comments about her simple background at elegant dinner parties. It evolved into forgetting, to invite her on family outings. Then came the isolation, the quiet dismissal of loyal staff, replacing them with people who answered only to Tiffany. And now, this. The final, terrifying escalation. Tiffany had not just built a cage, she had been patiently, methodically, starving the bird within it. The pills were not an impulse, they were a graduation. Margaret moved her hands with a skill that only 50 years of experience in the kitchen can give. The smell of onion and garlic frying in butter filled the air, an honest and familiar aroma that contrasted with the cold, artificial atmosphere of the rest of the mansion. She was a relic of another time, before Tiffany, back when this house still had a bit of warmth. She had started working for the family when Jason was just a scrawny boy full of dreams, and she had seen Dorothy, then a woman in the prime of life, fight tooth and nail to give her son a future. She remembered her vibrant, with a loud laugh that filled every corner, always with a kind word for the staff. The woman she saw now, a pale, frightened shadow who barely left her room, was not even an echo of who she used to be. And Margaret knew, with the certainty given by instinct and observation, that this decay was not the work of time, but of malice. As she chopped a bunch of cilantro, she heard the hurried steps of Haley, the new maid, entering the kitchen with wide eyes and a bit of fear in her gaze. "Margaret, it was awful," Haley whispered, trembling. "What she just said to Mrs. Dorothy, how she treated her. It was so cruel." Mrs. Dorothy looked so helpless. Margaret gripped the knife tightly, her knuckles turning white. She said nothing, but her jaw clenched. She signaled Haley to be quiet, her eyes moving quickly toward the door, always alert. Tiffany had ears everywhere. "You stick to your work, dear," she said in a low voice. "Here, one sees many things. The important thing is knowing when to speak and when to be silent. And above all, who you are loyal to. Now go polish the silver in the dining room. Go on." Haley nodded, understanding the warning, and left. Margaret was left alone with her thoughts, which were a cauldron of rage and helplessness. She knew Tiffany was a viper. She knew it from the day she set foot in this house with her airs of grandeur and calculating gaze, but she never imagined her cruelty would go so far, denying medicine to a sick person. That wasn't just malice, it was attempted murder on a slow burn. Later, while going up to the second floor with a stack of clean, freshly ironed sheets, she saw the scene that confirmed her worst fears. Dorothy was walking down the hall, leaning on the wall, her skin an alarming grayish tone, moving with the slowness of a ghost. A few seconds later, the door to the master suite opened, and Tiffany came out, fresh as a daisy after her lunch. She was humming a trendy tune, checking her cell phone with a satisfied smile on her face. She passed her mother-in-law without even looking at her, as if she were invisible, and the contrast between the two women was like a punch to the gut for Margaret. One was withering, fading in plain sight, while the other flourished, radiant and full of life. A life that Margaret was sure was being fed by the suffering of the other. Tiffany, reaching the end of the hall, stopped and turned toward Margaret. Her smile disappeared, replaced by a frown. "Margaret, are those the linens for my room?" "Yes, ma'am. Clean and ironed, as ordered." "Bring them here." Margaret approached obediently. Tiffany took one of the pillowcases, examined it against the light, and then made a gesture of disgust. "This still smells like bleach. How many times have I told you to use the imported softener I bought? Or are you getting too old to remember things? Maybe you're too old for this job." The humiliation was public, calculated. Dorothy, who had paused a few yards away, observed the scene with tired eyes. Tiffany did it on purpose, so her mother-in-law would see she had absolute control, that everyone in this house were her subjects, and that any alliance was useless. "I didn't forget, ma'am. I used the softener you asked for," replied Margaret, her voice firm despite the rage she felt. "Well, it doesn't seem like it. Wash everything again, and if it happens again, I swear you're out on the street. Now get out of my sight." Margaret turned around without saying another word, the pile of sheets in her arms feeling like a load of lead. But as she passed Dorothy, she stopped for a fraction of a second, just enough to whisper, almost without moving her lips, "You are not alone, ma'am." That afternoon, Margaret prepared a chamomile tea, the one she knew Dorothy had always liked to calm her nerves. Before going up, she checked that Tiffany was busy on a long call in her study. She went up the service stairs, moving with a stealth that wasn't typical of her. She knocked softly on Dorothy's door. "Mrs. Dorothy, it's me, Margaret. Can I come in?" There was a silence, and then a weak voice replied, "Come in." Dorothy was sitting in an armchair by the window, with the old blue shawl over her legs. She looked smaller than ever. Seeing Margaret, a spark of fear crossed her eyes. Was it a trap? Was she coming to spy on her under Tiffany's orders? Margaret understood her mistrust. She left the tea tray on a table far from Dorothy and stood near the door. "I brought you a little tea for your nerves," she said softly. "I didn't put sugar in it, just how you like it." Dorothy didn't move. She just watched her. "You don't look well, ma'am," continued Margaret, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur. "And forgive my boldness, but what you have isn't the sickness of age. It's something else. It's the wickedness of others." Dorothy's eyes filled with tears. It was the first time in months that someone validated her suffering, that someone recognized she wasn't crazy. "I don't know what to do, Margaret," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I feel so alone. Jason, he doesn't believe me. The boss is blind. But he's not a bad man. He's just bewitched by that woman, said Margaret, anger seeping into her voice. But you have to be strong. Please, eat. Don't let yourself die. If you get weak, that woman wins, and we can't let her win. Dorothy looked at the cup of tea. Then she looked at Margaret and saw in her eyes the same unwavering loyalty she had seen for years. She saw a friend, an ally, and if she sees you here, she'll fire you, Margaret. Let her fire me, replied Margaret with unexpected fierceness. There are jobs everywhere, but there is only one conscience, and mine wouldn't let me sleep if I left you alone in this. Be very careful, ma'am. Don't trust anything she gives you. If you need something, anything, find me. Invent an excuse that the sink is clogged, that there's a stain on the carpet, whatever. I'll understand. Just at that moment, they heard the sound of Tiffany's study door opening downstairs. Panic seized both of them. Quick, said Margaret. Pretend you're scolding me. Go on, Dorothy urged. Understanding the plan, she raised her voice a little. And this stain, Margaret? I've told you 1,000 times to be more careful with the furniture. Margaret, following the act, responded with false submission. I'm sorry, ma'am. I'll clean it right now. It won't happen again. Tiffany passed by the hallway, her head barely peeking through the ajar door of Dorothy's room. She saw Margaret on her knees rubbing a table leg with a handkerchief, and Dorothy looking at her with a fake air of authority. Tiffany smiled with satisfaction. Everything was in order. The old woman still believed she had some power, and the help was still in their place. She closed the door and continued on her way. Inside the room, Margaret and Dorothy exchanged a look. Fear mixed with a new feeling, a small, tiny flame of hope. They were no longer a helpless old woman and a submissive maid. They were two women united in a silent pact against the darkness, threatening to consume everything. Dorothy took the cup of tea, and the warmth that spread through her hands was the first real warmth she had felt in a long time. The noise of Jason's office was a monster with 1,000 heads, phones that wouldn't stop ringing, the constant murmur of advisors discussing figures in the boardroom, the frantic typing of his assistant on the other side of the glass door. He was standing in front of the enormous window that offered him a panoramic view of downtown Seattle, a sea of concrete and ambition that he felt he had conquered. But today the view brought him no satisfaction. An important agreement with Japanese investors was getting complicated. The numbers didn't add up, the projections were too optimistic, and his main partner seemed to be hiding information. He felt an immense pressure on the back of his neck, a dull ache that was the price of keeping his empire afloat. Rubbing his temples, he thought about his house. It was supposed to be his refuge, the quiet place where he could disconnect from this chaos. But lately, even thinking about his home brought a pang of anxiety. His mother, every time he spoke to her on the phone, seemed more faded, her voice more fragile. And then there were her complaints, her confusion. He felt guilty. He knew he didn't spend enough time with her, but the business consumed everything. Tiffany, on the other hand, always reassured him. Tiffany was his anchor in that regard. She took care of everything. She was strong, efficient. It was as if the thought had summoned her. His personal phone vibrated on the walnut desk. On the screen shone the name, Tiffany. "My love, how are you?" he said, trying not to let the stress show in his voice. "Hi, honey. I'm fine, but I'm calling you about your mom." Tiffany's voice on the other end of the line was a silk whisper loaded with a fake concern that she had perfected into an art form. "Oh, Jason, I'm so worried. Really, I think her condition is getting worse." Jason tensed up. What happened now? Did she fall? Does she feel sick? No. Physically, she's the same as always. It's her head, her mind. This morning, she caused a terrible scene. She woke up screaming that I had hidden her heart pills. Imagine, after I got up early myself to make her smoothie and give them to her with so much love, she accused me in front of one of the new maids. It was so embarrassing. Jason closed his eyes, the headache intensifying. It was the same story over and over again. But, are you sure, Tiffany? Last night when I spoke to her, she told me she felt very weak, that her chest hurt. There was a calculated pause. Then Tiffany let out a sigh as if she were carrying a weight too great for her alone. "My life, It's part of the same thing. The doctor warned us. Remember? Dr. Curtis said she might start to somatize, to feel physical discomfort to get attention, or because her mind no longer processes reality well. She calls for attention, so you worry, so you drop everything and come running. I understand her, poor thing. She must feel lonely. But you can't neglect the business for every one of her crises. That's why I'm here, to take care of her. Tiffany's words were logical, reasonable. They appealed to his practical side, to the businessman who had to make cold decisions. But most of all, they validated the one thing he desperately needed to believe: that delegating his mother's care to his wife was the right thing to do, not just the easy thing. It absolved him of his guilt. It was easier to believe his mother was losing her mind than to admit he was, in fact, abandoning her for the sake of his empire. "You're right," he said finally, resignation tinting his voice. "Thank you for being so patient with her, my love. I don't know what I'd do without you. You don't have to thank me for anything. She's your mother, and I love her as if she were my own," she lied with chilling ease. "You concentrate on your meeting. I'll handle everything here. I'll prepare your favorite dinner tonight. I love you, and I love you." He hung up the phone and stared at the device for a long time. A small part of him, a childish voice that sounded strangely like his mother's, whispered that something wasn't right, but he dismissed it. It was guilt, nothing more. Tiffany was right. He had to trust her. Meanwhile, at the mansion, Dorothy had managed to walk, leaning on the furniture, to the main hallway. The door to her room had been left ajar. Tiffany had been quiet since returning from her lunch, and the house was silent. She had the vague hope of finding Margaret. It was high-pitched, mocking, and full of venom. "Oh, Jessica, you can't even imagine. The old woman is unbearable today. I had to put her in her place. She staged a circus over her stupid pills. Yes, of course I took them away. Obviously. Let's see if that calms her down once and for all." Dorothy froze against the wall, the cold of the marble penetrating her nightgown. Every word was a dagger stabbing into her chest. "Jason? Ha! He believes everything I tell him. I just called him. I told him a story about how the little old lady is already senile, and he swallowed it whole. Thank you, my love. I don't know what I'd do without you. Imagine what an idiot. While he kills himself working, I make sure his burden of a mother doesn't cause him problems. It's a perfect arrangement. The truth, when it finally comes, is often more brutal than we can imagine. The betrayal isn't just from Tiffany, it's the realization that her own son has been blinded. Now that she knows the truth, what can she possibly do? Dorothy had to cover her mouth to keep from screaming. The pain of betrayal was 1,000 times worse than the dizziness or the tightness in her chest. It wasn't her mind that was failing. It was her son's wife's heart that was rotten. Tiffany came out of the library, still laughing at her conversation. Turning around, she found herself face to face with Dorothy. For a fraction of a second, panic appeared in her eyes, but she recovered instantly. The sweet mask she used for Jason disappeared, revealing her true face, one of contempt and triumph. She didn't say a single word. She simply gave her a slow, cruel smile, a silent confirmation of everything Dorothy had just heard. Then she walked around her as if she were an old piece of furniture, and continued on her way to the front door, her heels clicking on the marble like hammer blows. Dorothy was left alone in the hallway, trembling from head to toe. It was no longer doubt that tormented her, but a terrible and absolute certainty. She was trapped in her son's house with an enemy who wanted to see her dead, and her own son was the blind guardian of her prison. Dorothy shuffled back to her room, every step a monumental burden. The outside world, with its marble corridors and Chinese vases, felt unreal and threatening. Her room, despite its impersonal luxury, was the only corner where she could crumble without being seen. She sat on the edge of the bed, which sank under her insignificant weight, and stared at her hands she no longer recognized, swollen by age, skin thin as tissue paper and spotted by time. But beneath that fragility, she could still see the ghost of hands that had been strong, calloused, tireless. She opened the closet, a cedar monster that smelled of wealth and mothballs. She ignored the dull-colored dresses Tiffany had bought her, clothes that made her feel like an old, forgotten doll. At the bottom, inside a cardboard box, was what she was looking for. She pulled out a hand-knitted shawl of a faded blue color, washed countless times. It was full of patches, small testimonies of a life of hardship. She pressed it against her chest, closing her eyes. The smell coming off it wasn't cedar, but an almost imperceptible scent of wood smoke, diner grease, and the sweat of honest work. Holding the rough fabric, she didn't need to close her eyes to remember. The images weren't a dream. They were part of her, etched into her soul. She saw herself, 30 years younger, standing next to a hot griddle in a dusty corner of a roadside diner, the heat of the fire on her face, the hiss of the bacon grease falling on the grill, the smell of the pancakes and burgers she prepared before the sun even came up. Every penny she earned, every sweaty coin went into a small metal coffee can hidden under her cot. She spoke aloud, but only to herself, a whisper lost in the immensity of the room. With what I made that week at the county fair, I bought you your first school shoes, son. Black leather shoes that were a little too big so they would last you. Your little eyes shone so much when I put them on you. She caressed a patch near the edge of the shawl, one made with a thread of a slightly different color, and this was when you got sick with that cough. An ugly, barking cough that wouldn't let you sleep. I didn't sleep for 3 nights straight, son. By day at the diner, and by night sewing other people's clothes by the light of a kerosene lamp to scrape together enough for the medicine and the doctor's visit. I wrapped myself with you in this shawl and sang to you until you fell asleep. The luxury around her became grotesque. The crystal chandelier hanging from the ceiling, the heavy velvet curtains, the Persian rug so soft under her bare feet. Everything was an insult to the memory of her sacrifice. She looked again at the photo of Jason, the one with the toothless smile. That boy had made her a promise whispered in the darkness of their humble trailer while she stroked his hair. When I grow up, Mom, I'm going to be a millionaire, and I'm going to build you a castle, the biggest one of all, and you're going to live like a queen, and you're never going to have to work again. I swear. A solitary, bitter tear rolled down her cheek and fell onto the wool of the shawl, darkening the fabric. He had kept his promise. He had built her a castle, but he had forgotten to tell her that in fairy tales, castles sometimes come with dragons, and the dragon of this castle slept in the same bed as her son. She got up and walked to the window. Below, in the perfectly manicured garden, a gardener was pruning the rose bushes with surgical precision. Everything was order, control, beauty. Artificial, a cold beauty, soulless, like the woman who now owned it all. Dorothy remembered her own dirt yard with its pots of geraniums and her little vegetable patch. It was a mess, yes, but it was alive. It smelled of wet earth, of life. Here it only smelled of money and loneliness. She clutched the shawl tighter, burying her face in the rough wool. This piece of old, patched fabric was her anchor to reality. It was the proof of her love, the flag of her struggle. Where did that woman go? She whispered to the empty room, her voice a stranger's. Tiffany could take her medicine, could poison her son's mind, but she couldn't erase the memory of the woman she had been, the mother who had fought like a lioness for her cub. The irony was suffocating. She had survived poverty, hunger, and exhaustion to build his future, only to be erased by the very luxury she had enabled. She had faced down creditors and fires, but she was being undone by a whisper and a stolen pill. Jason's promise resonated in her head again, but this time with a painful echo. You're going to live like a queen. She looked at her reflection in the window glass. She saw a fragile, pale old woman, eyes red from crying, a queen prisoner in her own tower, waiting not for a prince to rescue her, but for a son to wake up from the spell before it was too late. The bitter irony made her let out a choked sob. The price of his dream had been too high. The following week, the mansion transformed into an anthill of frantic activity. Catering vans blocked the driveway. Florists with huge arrangements of lilies and orchids came and went, and a team of waiters and extra staff invaded the kitchen, relegating Margaret to the background. Tiffany was organizing one of her monumental parties, this time to celebrate the closing of a deal for Jason. It was a golden opportunity for her, not to celebrate her husband's success, but to show off in front of the city's elite, to reaffirm her status as the queen of her marble castle. Tiffany supervised every detail with the precision of an army general. From the color of the napkins to the selection of wines, everything had to be perfect, opulent, a blatant demonstration of her wealth and good taste. She moved through the house with electric energy, barking orders left and right, her voice a whip keeping everyone on alert. Dorothy watched everything from the second-floor railing, feeling like a stranger in a foreign land. The noise, the movement, the energy of so many strangers in her home overwhelmed her. She felt small and insignificant amidst so much grandeur. She had the naive hope that since it was a celebration for Jason's achievement, she could participate, maybe sit in a quiet corner and watch her son happy surrounded by his friends. She had even taken her best dress out of her trunk, a simple navy blue one she had worn to a niece's wedding years ago. That afternoon, while combing her hair with slow hands in front of the mirror, Tiffany entered her room without knocking. She was wearing a stunning red dress that clung to her body and diamond jewelry that cast sparkles all over the room. "What are you supposed to be doing?" asked Tiffany, her voice loaded with insulting disbelief upon seeing Dorothy's dress on the bed. "Well, I'm getting ready for the party, dear. It's to celebrate Jason." "No." Tiffany let out a laugh, a sound so devoid of joy that Dorothy's blood ran cold. "You at my party?" "Oh, please, Dorothy, don't be ridiculous. Listen to me. My guests are important people, worldly people, diplomats, business owners, artists. They wouldn't understand your condition. You would feel completely out of place. Besides, with that sick face you have, you'd only bring down the mood. But he's my son, and it's my house." "This," interrupted Tiffany, her voice losing all feigned sweetness and turning into an ice blade, "I am doing for your own good. Do you understand? So you don't embarrass yourself. You are going to stay here in your room. I'll tell Margaret to bring up a tray with some dinner. You're going to watch TV or pray your rosaries, whatever little old ladies do, but you are not going to set foot outside this room. Are we clear?" Dorothy looked down, humiliation burning her cheeks. She didn't have the strength to argue. She knew it was useless. She nodded silently. "Perfect. I'm glad we understand each other," said Tiffany, turning around. Before leaving, she stopped at the threshold and added, "Oh, and don't even think about calling Jason to complain. I'll tell him you felt very indisposed and that you preferred to rest. He will believe me. He always believes me." The party began at dusk. From her room, Dorothy listened as the house came alive. First, the soft sound of a string quartet, then the voices and laughter filling the spaces, rising up the stairs to reach her door like a mocking murmur. The rhythmic bass of the music the DJ started playing later vibrated through the floor, a constant pulse that felt like the heartbeat of a hostile stranger. Margaret brought up a tray, just as Tiffany had ordered. It contained a small bowl of soup and a glass of water servant's food. Her eyes met Dorothy's in a silence loaded with meaning. "I'm so sorry, ma'am," whispered Margaret. "It's not your fault, dear. Go on. Get back to your chores before they see you here." She peeked out the window facing the backyard. It was illuminated by hundreds of fairy lights, transformed into a fairy tale setting. She saw her son, Jason, so handsome in his dark suit, laughing while holding a glass of champagne. Tiffany was glued to his arm, smiling, greeting people, the perfect hostess, the proud wife. They looked like the ideal couple, the king and queen of that shiny, fake world. And she, the queen mother, the one who had sacrificed everything so he could reach that throne, was exiled in her tower, looking through the bars of her window. A while later, Haley, the young maid, stealthily came up to her room. She carried a small plate hidden under a napkin. "Mrs. Dorothy, I brought you this. They are salmon canapés from what they are serving downstairs. I thought maybe you'd crave something tastier." Dorothy looked at her, moved by the girl's act of kindness. It was a huge risk for her. "Thank you, dear, but you shouldn't have." She couldn't finish the sentence. The door burst open. Tiffany was there, her face a mask of fury. Her hawk eyes landed on the plate Haley was holding. "What is the meaning of this?" she hissed. Haley stood paralyzed, white as a sheet. I only." "You dared to disobey a direct order," exclaimed Tiffany. her voice still low, but vibrating with rage. In this house, pity for people who don't deserve it is not tolerated. You are fired right now. Ma'am, please, I need the job, pleaded the young woman, with eyes full of tears. You should have thought of that before betraying my trust. I want you out of my house this instant. Your severance check will arrive by mail. Out. Tiffany snatched the plate from Haley's hands and threw it on the floor. The canapes and pieces of porcelain scattered across the carpet. This wasn't just about a plate of food. It was a public execution of kindness. Tiffany is sending a clear message. In this house, compassion is a crime, and Dorothy is now truly, completely isolated. Stay with us to see if anyone can break through this wall of terror. Then she grabbed the girl by the arm and dragged her out of the room. Dorothy heard Haley's sobs as she was dragged down the stairs. Tiffany returned a minute later, stood in the doorway, and looked at Dorothy with a coldness that chilled the bones. This is so it's clear to you, she said, her voice flat and emotionless, to you and to any other stray cat from the staff who dares to feel sorry for you. Here, the only one who gives orders is me. Any act of rebellion, however small, will be crushed. She closed the door, leaving Dorothy alone with the mess on the floor and the echo of the poor girl's sobs. The loneliness she felt before was now something much darker and deeper. It was forced isolation, watched, maintained by terror. The music from the party downstairs suddenly turned up in volume, a wave of fake joy sounding like the cruelest of mockeries. The afternoon advanced with torturous slowness. Outside, the sun began to descend, painting the Pacific Northwest sky in shades of orange and purple. But inside Dorothy's room, the only light was a solitary lamp casting long, deformed shadows on the walls. Every tick-tock of the grandfather clock in the hall was like a hammer hitting her skull. The dizziness hadn't diminished. On the contrary, it was now accompanied by tightness in her chest, as if an invisible hand were squeezing her heart. It was a familiar pain, an alarm signal that her pills always kept at bay. A sharp spasm, a stab of pain ran down her left arm, making her gasp. Panic, which had been latent, returned with renewed and brutal force. There had to be something somewhere. Then she remembered months ago, when she had first arrived at the mansion and still had control over her own medicines, she had kept a small emergency stash, just in case. She had hidden it at the bottom of the wooden trunk she used to store her few belongings from the old days, the things Tiffany considered trash, but which were treasures to her. Moving was an odyssey. Every inch she advanced from the bed to the corner where the trunk was sat was a triumph against the weakness invading her. She moved in silence, with the stealth of a thief in her own home, terrified by the idea that Tiffany might return and find her. She reached the trunk and knelt with difficulty, her knees creaking in protest. The lid was heavy. She had to use all her body weight to lift it. The smell of old wood and stored clothes hit her, an aroma of her other life. Her hands rummaged urgently through folded shawls, an old photo album, and a pair of worn-out sneakers. And there, at the bottom, wrapped in an embroidered handkerchief, was the small cardboard box. Hope flooded her, a wave of relief so intense it almost made her cry. With clumsy, trembling fingers, she broke the cardboard seal and opened the box. It was empty. A stifled moan escaped her lips. She shook the box as if a sudden movement could make the pills appear by magic. Nothing, just the hollow echo of cardboard. Looking for this, mother-in-law? Tiffany's voice, soft and mocking, came from the door. Dorothy turned with her heart in a fist. Tiffany hadn't just arrived. She was leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed, a crooked smile playing on her lips. It was clear she had been watching her for some time, enjoying her desperation. In one hand, she held the small aluminum blister pack with the pills. They shone under the lamplight. "Thought you were smarter than me, right?" said Tiffany, walking slowly toward her like a predator approaching its prey. "Thought you could have your little secrets in my house, but I know everything, Dorothy. I check every corner of this house, especially the ones that smell of poverty and mothballs." Dorothy tried to get up, leaning on the trunk. "Give them to me, Tiffany, please. I beg you. I feel very sick." "Oh, you feel sick?" Tiffany stopped in front of her, looking down with absolute contempt. What a pity. Maybe if you behaved, if you were a grateful old lady and not a burden, I would consider helping you. But you don't cooperate, always complaining, always with your dramas. With deliberate and cruel slowness, Tiffany began to pop the pills out of the blister pack one by one. Dorothy watched her, horrified, not understanding. What? What are you doing? Instead of answering, Tiffany walked toward the private bathroom of the suite. Dorothy followed her, stumbling, terror growing inside her. She stopped at the threshold, observing the scene with paralyzing disbelief. Tiffany stood in front of the toilet and, maintaining eye contact with Dorothy through the mirror, dropped the first pill into the water, then the second and the third. One by one, the small anchors of Dorothy's life disappeared into the white porcelain. "No, no!" screamed Dorothy, a torn sound that came from the depths of her being. She tried to lunge at her, to stop her, but her legs didn't respond. The weakness was total. She could only extend a hand, a useless gesture. Tiffany dropped the last pill, and with a smile of pure malice, flushed the handle. The sound of the water swirling and taking away her only hope was the most terrible sound Dorothy had heard in her life. This is the moment the game becomes lethal. This isn't just cruelty anymore. It's a cold, deliberate act of murder, and Tiffany is savoring every second. Dorothy is at the absolute bottom, but the story isn't over. Keep listening, because help must come soon. It was the sound of her own death sentence. "Now the box is truly empty," said Tiffany, throwing the cardboard and aluminum into the trash. "Sweet dreams, mother-in-law." She turned to leave the bathroom, but Dorothy, overcome by pain and despair, had collapsed on the floor. Her body couldn't take any more. Tiffany stopped, looked at her lying on the tiles, and instead of showing a shred of compassion, simply stepped over her legs as if she were an insignificant obstacle in her path. She left the room without saying another word, closing the door behind her. Dorothy remained on the cold floor, the echo of the toilet still ringing in her ears. The pain in her chest was no longer just tightness. It was a fire consuming her. Air wasn't reaching her lungs. Darkness began to invade the edges of her vision. Her last conscious thought was for her son Jason, her boy, her king, the one who had built her a castle so a witch could let her die. An hour later, Tiffany returned from an afternoon of shopping in Bellevue. She entered the house loaded with bags from luxury brands, humming the same melody she had hummed at the party. She went up to the master suite, and upon passing Dorothy's room, she noticed the bathroom door was ajar. She looked inside. She encountered Dorothy's body lying on the floor, unmoving. Her first reaction wasn't alarm, nor concern, nor even surprise. It was pure, an absolute irritation, as if she had found an object out of place, a stain on her impeccable carpet. She let out a sigh of annoyance and gave her a slight kick in the side with her stiletto heel. "Get up. Stop making spectacles." Dorothy didn't move. Her face was pale. Her lips had a bluish tint. She was unconscious, breathing very shallowly. Tiffany realized then that this was more than simple drama. This was the end she had been waiting for, the result of her plan. An almost imperceptible smile appeared on her lips. Her problem was about to resolve itself, but she couldn't leave her there. If someone found her, if Jason arrived and saw her lying there would be questions. She had to move her. She didn't call anyone. She didn't ask for help. With an effort that made her grunt with annoyance, she grabbed Dorothy under the arms. The old woman's body was dead weight. Tiffany dragged her down the polished marble hallway, Dorothy's head bumping softly against the floor with every tug. It was a grotesque and brutal image, but she didn't take her back to the bedroom. That was too hidden, too merciful. She wanted an audience, even if it was just herself. She dragged the inert body all the way to the grand living room, and with a grunt of effort, hoisted her into the farthest armchair, the one partially in shadow. She arranged her like a broken doll, slumping her head to the side. "There," Tiffany whispered, smoothing her dress. "Much better. You can have a front row seat to my celebration." For an instant, Dorothy seemed to regain a speck of consciousness. Her eyelids fluttered, and her eyes opened barely a slit. Her gaze, cloudy and lost, met Tiffany's. Her lips moved, trying to form a word. Perhaps her son's name. Tiffany leaned over her, her face close, her voice a venomous and final whisper. Die already. Do us all a favor. With that, she turned around, walked to the bar in the corner of the room, and poured herself a snifter of expensive brandy. She walked to the unlit fireplace, swirling the glass, feeling a profound sense of peace and victory. The problem was almost solved. There, in the armchair, in the darkness of the grand living room, Dorothy's breathing became weaker and weaker, a fragile murmur against the absolute silence. The sounds of the house, the distant steps, the murmur of the television Tiffany had turned on, began to fade for her. Only the darkness remained, the cold, and the slow extinguishing of her life. Alone, in the heart of the opulence her son had created, abandoned at the hands of the woman who had sentenced her to death. The question floating in the silence was if that would truly be her last breath. In his office, Jason was in the boardroom on the 40th floor of his corporate headquarters, feeling the air becoming denser, harder to breathe. On the mahogany table, a series of graphs and financial projections showed the possible future of his company. It was the most important deal of his career, a merger that would catapult him into the major leagues, to a level of wealth and power that even for him was hard to imagine. But he couldn't concentrate. The figures danced before his eyes. His advisors' voices turned into a monotonous drone. He felt a cold, heavy knot in the pit of his stomach, an anguish that had no name or reason to be. "Sir," said one of his financial directors, an older man named Robert. "If I may, in Clause 7B, the growth projection for the Asian market seems—" "Wrong," interrupted Jason, his voice harsher than intended. "Everything is wrong. Check the numbers again." His men exchanged looks of confusion. The numbers were perfect. They had checked them a dozen times. "Sir, with all due respect, the projections are conservative and audited." "I said check them." He slammed his palm on the table, making the coffee cups rattle. Tense silence fell over the room. "Take a recess. 10 minutes." He left the boardroom and walked to his private office, loosening his tie knot as if it were strangling him. He stood in front of the window, watching the city stretch out at his feet. What the hell was wrong with him? It was stress, he told himself, the pressure of the business. But it was a lie, and he knew it. This sensation was different. It was deep, personal anxiety, almost like a premonition. His gaze landed on the only personal photo he had on his desk, a photo of his mother taken a couple of years ago. She was smiling, but her eyes already showed a trace of the sadness that now seemed permanent. Guilt assaulted him, a bitter taste in his mouth. When was the last time he had called her just to talk? Meanwhile, in the mansion's kitchen, Margaret felt a similar anguish, but hers had a clear and terrible cause. Tiffany had gone out earlier, supposedly, but returned and was now in the living room, leaving clear instructions she didn't want to be disturbed by any stupidity. Mrs. Dorothy had been silent for hours, ever since Tiffany had returned. Margaret hadn't seen her, and she had heard Tiffany find her passed out earlier. Tiffany was now in the living room, insisting on not being disturbed. That tomb-like silence was what was driving Margaret crazy. She had to do something. Fear paralyzed her. If she was wrong, if she alerted Tiffany, she would sign Dorothy's sentence, and her own. But if she did nothing, guilt would haunt her for the rest of her life. She looked at the kitchen phone. Impossible. Tiffany checked the call logs. Then she remembered something. A couple of weeks ago at the market, she had seen a stall selling cheap, prepaid cell phones, the kind that leave no trace. With the pretext of buying vegetables, she had used a bit of her own money to buy one. Madness, she thought at the time. Exaggerated precaution. Now it seemed like the most sensible decision of her life. She ran to her small room in the servants' quarters. She took the cell phone out of a shoebox hidden under her bed. Her hands were trembling so much she could barely hold it. Where did she get Jason's number? She had memorized it years ago in a fit of paranoia, copying it from the address book Dorothy kept like a treasure. She dialed it, her heart beating with colossal force. 1 ring, 2 rings. In his office, Jason saw his personal cell phone vibrate, an unknown number. He was about to ignore it. He wasn't in the mood for salespeople or wrong numbers. But something, that same premonition eating away at him, forced him to answer. "Hello? Mr. Jason." The voice on the other end was a frightened whisper, broken by bad signal and panic. "It's me, Margaret, the cook." Jason frowned. "Margaret, what's happening? Why are you calling me on this number?" "I can't talk much, sir. She can't know. Please, you have to listen to me." Margaret's voice was a torrent of urgency. "It's your mom. Mrs. Dorothy is very, very bad. Tiffany called me this morning. She told me she was confused, but fine." "No, sir, it's not true. It's a lie." Margaret's voice broke into a choked sob. "It's not her head, Mr. Jason. I swear to God it's not her head. It's her body. She's fading. I saw her lying in the hallway earlier, collapsed. Mrs. Tiffany dragged her away somewhere, and I haven't seen or heard from her in hours. I'm scared, sir. I'm very scared. It's already too late." Every word from Margaret was a hammer blow against the wall of denial Jason had built around himself. The key phrase resonated in his head with the force of an explosion. It's not her head, it's her body. It was the validation of that deep fear he had been ignoring out of love for his wife. "Sir, come now. Don't tell Mrs. Tiffany you're coming. They'll lie to you again. Come alone. But come now, please. In a house full of enemies, it takes just one brave friend. Margaret is risking her entire life on this one desperate call. This is the turning point. But will Jason finally listen, or is it already too late?" The call cut off. Margaret, terrified, had hung up. Jason stood there, phone in hand, completely motionless. The noise of the city on the other side of the glass disappeared. The millionaire deal, the board meeting, his empire, everything vanished. Only Margaret's terrified voice remained, and a horrifying image in his mind. His mother, lying on the floor. His financial director, Robert, entered the office. "Sir, the 10 minutes are up. The investors are waiting." Jason turned, and the look in his eyes made Robert step back. It was a look of fury, panic, and absolute determination. "Cancel the meeting." "But, sir, it's the deal of a lifetime." "To hell with the deal," roared Jason, sweeping the papers off his desk with his arm. They flew through the air like dry leaves. "Cancel everything. Now." Without saying another word, he left his office like a hurricane, leaving his employees stunned. He ran through the corridors of his own empire without looking at anyone. His only thought, his only mission, was to get home. Margaret's call had not only sown doubt, it had lit the fuse of a time bomb he himself, with his blindness, had helped build, and it was about to explode. Jason didn't remember how he got from his office to the underground parking lot. His mind was a red fog of panic and fury. When he started his luxury car, the roar of the engine sounded like a war cry. He shot out of the parking lot, tires screeching on the concrete, ignoring the astonished looks of security staff. Once on the streets of Seattle, the infernal afternoon traffic became a personal battlefield. He honked incessantly, drove in prohibited lanes, passed with recklessness that at any other moment would have seemed like madness. Every red light was torture. Every slow car in front of him, a personal enemy. The outside world had reduced to a series of obstacles separating him from his mother. While driving, his mind, freed from the yoke of denial, began to work at dizzying speed. He became a detective of his own tragedy, and the puzzle pieces began to fit with frightening clarity. A torrent of memories, previously harmless, now presented themselves as irrefutable proofs of his blindness. He saw a food truck where a woman flipped pancakes on a griddle, and the image hit him with the force of a punch, the smell of burnt batter and sacrifice. He remembered his mother's hands, always covered in flour or grease, the small burns she never complained about, hands that had built his future. He passed an elementary school and saw a boy with a sweater with a patch on the elbow. He remembered his own uniform, which his mother patched over and over with infinite skill and patience so he could go to school looking decent. When had that woman of iron, that force of nature, started to decay? The answer was so obvious, so shameful, he had to hit the steering wheel with his fist. It had started the day she moved into the mansion, the day Tiffany took the reins of her care. He began to replay conversations in his head, but this time the script was different. Tiffany's voice, always so sweet and reasonable. Your mom is exaggerating to get your attention, my love. His mother's voice, weak and hesitant on the phone. My son, I don't feel well. I think Tiffany forgets to give me my pills. Tiffany's response, always ready, always perfect. Poor thing, she can't distinguish anymore. I gave them to her myself. She's losing her memory. Jason, we have to be patient. Patient. My God, he had been an idiot. Every explanation from Tiffany, every justification no longer sounded like the voice of reason, but like that of a consummate liar. It had been so easy to believe her, so comfortable. It allowed him to stay focused on his work, on his ambition, while delegating the most important responsibility of his life, caring for the woman who had given him everything. Guilt was an acid burning his insides. It wasn't just Tiffany who was guilty. He was her accomplice, a blind, deaf, stupid accomplice. His phone rang, ripping him from his spiral of self-loathing. On the car screen shone Tiffany's smiling face. The call came through the speaker system. Hello, my life. Are you going to be long? I'm waiting for you for the Foundation Gala dinner. Jason's blood boiled. The frivolity, the absolute normality in his wife's voice was the final proof. Tiffany, he said, and his own voice sounded strange, deep and loaded with a threat he had never used with her. Yes, darling? Is something wrong? You sound weird. Where is my mother? He asked directly, without beating around the bush. There was a small pause. Your mother? Well, in her room resting. She was a little tired today, so she preferred not to come down. But she's perfectly fine. Don't worry. The lie, so fluid, so perfect, Jason's rage transformed into cutting ice. I'm coming over, he said, and cut the call before she could answer. He knew he had just alerted her. He knew she would try to fix the scene, invent a new lie, manipulate the situation. He had to arrive sooner. He floored the accelerator, the car leaping forward. He didn't care about anything anymore, not the other cars, not traffic laws, not even his own life. He only cared about hers. Finally, he turned onto the street of his gated community. The enormous houses, the impeccable lawns, everything that previously represented success now seemed like hollow, rotten scenery. He saw the entrance to his house, lights on giving a false appearance of home. He didn't go through the main gate. He drove to the service entrance, where he knew the cameras wouldn't catch him immediately. He braked with a screech of tires, left the engine running and the door open. He jumped out of the car and ran toward the kitchen door, his heart hammering against his chest, not from physical effort, but from the absolute terror of what he was about to find. Every step he took on the grass was a step toward the truth, a truth he suspected would destroy everything. His hand, trembling for the first time in years, landed on the doorknob. Jason turned the knob with infinite care. The service door opened without making the slightest noise. He entered the kitchen, and the silence greeting him was more alarming than any scream. The kitchen was spotless, but empty. No sign of Margaret or any other staff. A feeling of abandonment, that something terrible had happened and everyone had fled, seized him. Mom? He called, his voice a choked croak, fearful of the answer or lack thereof. Silence. He advanced through the house, his expensive Italian shoes feeling heavy as lead boots on the marble. The air was still, charged with palpable tension. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat. Every echo of his own steps sounded like an accusation. He reached the foot of the grand staircase. Mom? He called again. Louder this time, desperation tinting his voice. Still no answer. He went up the steps 2 at a time. The first thing he did was go to Dorothy's room. The door was closed. He threw it open, heart racing. The room was empty, the bed perfectly made, as if no one had slept in it. His mother's blue shawl was folded on a chair, a solitary touch of color in the sterile room. A shiver ran down Jason's spine. If she wasn't in her room, where was she? He went back down, mind racing a mile a minute. The garden? The library? Could she have fallen somewhere? Panic was beginning to cloud his judgment. And then he heard a sound almost imperceptible, but clear in the sepulchral silence of the house, the clink of a crystal glass against a wooden table. It was coming from the grand living room. His training as a businessman, his instinct for strategy took over. He didn't burst in running. He slowed down, his movements becoming stealthy, predatory. He approached the living room door, which was ajar a few inches. The fear he felt was so intense it was almost a physical sensation, a cold that soaked his bones. He put his eye to the crack and looked inside, and the world, as he knew it, stopped. The scene was a painting of hell. In the farthest armchair, the one partially in shadows, he saw a huddled figure. His mother was slumped, motionless, her head hanging at an angle that didn't look natural. From that distance, he couldn't tell if she was breathing. She looked like a rag doll from which all the stuffing had been removed. And on the other side of the room, standing by the unlit fireplace, was Tiffany. She was wearing an elegant black evening gown and holding a snifter of brandy. She didn't seem worried or scared. Her expression was one of absolute calm, of contemplative patience. She was looking at Dorothy, but not how one looks at a sick person. She looked at her like an entomologist looks at an insect that has finally stopped moving under the pin. Jason was about to burst in, to scream, to destroy everything, but a frozen part of his brain told him to wait, to watch, to listen. He needed the complete truth, however monstrous. Tiffany raised her glass, the amber liquid shining in the lamplight. It wasn't a loud toast, but an intimate gesture to herself, a silent toast directed at the inert figure of her mother-in-law. She brought the glass to her lips and drank a long, slow sip, savoring it. Then she lowered the glass and, in the absolute silence of the room, sighed. It wasn't a sigh of sadness or relief. It was a sigh of profound and serene satisfaction. And then she said words not shouted, but whispered to herself, a final confession to the universe, the phrase that would put the final period on her masterpiece of cruelty. Finally, a little peace. In the instant those 4 words reached Jason's ears, something inside him broke forever. It wasn't a thought. It was a seismic fracture in the center of his soul. The image of the woman he loved, the mother of his future children, his partner, dissolved, and in her place appeared the image of a monster with the face of an angel. Every lie, every manipulation, every act of cruelty he hadn't wanted to see, now projected in his mind in a horrible and dazzling sequence. The sound he heard next wasn't Tiffany's voice, but his own blood roaring in his ears, a deafening thunder drowning out everything else. The love he felt for her turned into ashes, and from those ashes was born a hatred so pure and vast it left him breathless. The foundation of his life, his marriage, his success, his judgment, everything collapsed in that single, frightful second. He stood frozen in the threshold, his hand still on the door, body paralyzed, but mind screaming. His world had ended, and he, blind and deaf, had been applauding while the apocalypse was consummated in his own house. The silence before the storm was over. Now only the hurricane remained. Jason's universe, a cosmos carefully built on pillars of logic, ambition, and iron control, disintegrated the precise instant his wife's words. Finally, a little peace crossed the threshold and nailed themselves into his brain. There was no process of understanding. There was a detonation. Love, or what he had believed was love, evaporated, leaving in its place a void immediately filled by magma of primal fury, the fury of a lion cub finding its mother wounded on the savannah. While he was frozen in the threshold, he saw Tiffany take one more sip from her glass, a sort of period to her macabre toast. That small gesture, so casual, so full of a peace that had been stolen from his mother, was what broke the dam of his self-control. The living room door didn't open. It was annihilated. Jason rammed it with his shoulder, the mahogany wood splintering around the lock and crashing against the interior wall with a crash that shook the entire house. A painting of a Swiss landscape detached from the wall and fell to the floor, glass shattering. Tiffany flinched so violently the glass escaped her hands, spilling the brandy over her black dress and shattering against the marble floor in a mess of glass and amber liquid. She turned, eyes wide with panic, and saw Jason standing in the frame of the broken door. He wasn't her husband. He was the incarnation of a final judgment, broad shoulders blocking the hallway light, face contracted in a mask of pure hate. "Jason, my love, what the hell is wrong with you? You almost scared me to death." Her voice, her sharpest weapon, tried to weave a net of normality of offended indignation, but the trembling in her hands betrayed her. He said nothing. He started walking toward her with the deliberate slowness of a panther stalking. His steps made no noise on the carpet, but each one was a sentence drawing nearer. "What are you doing here so early?" she continued, backing away, desperately trying to buy time, to build a lie. "Your mom felt sick," she fainted. "I was so scared. Just now, in this precise instant, I was going to call the ambulance. I swear on my life." Jason stopped in the center of the room. A guttural laugh, a horrible, joyless sound, erupted from his chest. "You were going to call." "Seriously, Tiffany? That's the best lie you can come up with? You were going to call after your celebration toast? Toast? Are you crazy? I don't know what you're talking about." I was nervous. I poured myself a drink to calm down before. "Don't lie to me again." Jason's roar was so powerful it made the air vibrate. With a violent sweep of his arm, he cleared the coffee table, the brandy bottle, the silver ice bucket, the crystal glasses. Everything flew through the air, smashing against the wall in a symphony of destruction. "I saw you. I heard you. I saw everything. The dam of denial hasn't just broken, it has exploded. This is the moment we've all been waiting for, the truth, in all its righteous fury, finally being unleashed. Tiffany's world is crumbling, and we're here for it." He advanced on her, cornering her against the unlit fireplace. She raised her hands, a useless gesture of defense. "Jason, please, listen to me." "No, you are going to listen to Emmy." He pointed at her with a finger trembling with rage. "While my mother was breaking her back over a hot griddle so I could have books, you were planning how to spend the money she earned with her burned hands. While she was sewing strangers' clothes until dawn to pay for my college, you were choosing the jewelry you were going to buy with the fruits of her sacrifice. Every luxury you have, every dress, every trip, every drop of expensive wine you've drunk in this house, everything is stained with her sweat and her blood." "That's not fair," shrieked Tiffany, finding a glimpse of her old arrogance. "I've sacrificed things too. I've put up with your mother, her complaints, her smell of the simple life. And you? Where were you while I dealt with her every day? In your office, in your ivory tower, counting your money. If anyone is to blame for this, it's you too for abandoning her." The blow hit the mark. A spasm of pain crossed Jason's face. But instead of weakening him, the truth in Tiffany's words only fueled his fury more, because he knew she was right, and that made him hate her even more for being the one to tell him. "Yes, you're right. I am guilty. Guilty of being blind, an idiot, a bad son." His voice dropped to a frozen hiss. "And I'm going to spend the rest of my life paying for that sin. But you, Tiffany, you are not guilty. You are a monster, and monsters don't deserve to live in palaces." He shoved her aside, not intending to hurt her, but to get her out of his way. He ran to his mother. He knelt down, his whole body shaking. He brushed a strand of gray hair from her face. Her skin was cold, almost waxy. "Mom, Mommy, it's me, son." His voice was a broken plea. "Forgive me, please. Forgive me. Don't go. Don't leave me. Remember the beach in California, Mom? When I was scared of the ocean and you told me the waves only tickled the sand? You took my hand and walked me in with you. You told me to be brave. You have to be brave now, Mom. Please, fight." He sought a pulse on her wrist and barely found it. He pulled out his phone, dialed 911. "Emergency. What is your—" "I need an ambulance now," screamed Jason. "My mother is unconscious. I think she hasn't been given her heart medication in days. In days. Sir, calm down. Is she breathing?" Jason leaned in, putting his ear next to Dorothy's mouth. He felt the faintest breath. "Yes, barely. It's very weak." "Does she have a pulse?" He checked her neck again. "Yes, but very fast and very weak. Please, you have to hurry." While giving the address, he saw Tiffany approaching, trying to snatch the phone. "Don't tell them that, Jason. You're going to get us in legal trouble. They're going to think we—" Jason jumped up and shoved her away with his forearm. "You have a legal problem. Get away from me. Get away from her. He ended the call, chest heaving with agitation. At that moment, Margaret ran into the room, attracted by the screams and the crash. She was holding an apron in her hands, and her eyes were wide with terror. Boss. My God, Mrs. Dorothy. Margaret. Jason felt a wave of gratitude. He wasn't alone. Help me. Get a damp cloth, something. Margaret ran to the kitchen and returned in seconds with a cloth soaked in cold water. She knelt beside Dorothy and began wiping her forehead with infinite tenderness, murmuring prayers. I suspected it, boss, said Margaret in a low voice, not looking at Jason but knowing he was listening. I knew she wasn't giving your mom her medicine. I knew it was her. I didn't know how to stop her. Jason closed his eyes. The final confirmation. The last piece of the puzzle. He turned slowly and looked at Tiffany, who stood petrified near the fireplace, trapped, exposed, with no more lies to tell. He stood up and began to walk across the room, but not toward her. He walked like a caged animal. He picked up a priceless porcelain figurine from a shelf, weighed it in his hand, and threw it against the wall where it turned to dust. All this, said his voice dangerously calm, all this circus you staged, the gaslighting, making her believe she was crazy, firing people who were kind to her, hiding her food and finally her medicine. It was a perfect plan, wasn't it? Slow, silent, no one would notice. It would look like natural death. The little old lady finally gave out. He stopped and looked at her, eyes burning with cold fire. But you were wrong about one thing. You thought I was so stupid, so blind, that I would never notice, and you almost succeeded. But you forgot that blood calls to blood, and my mother's blood screamed so loud I heard it from the other side of the city. In the distance, the barely perceptible sound of a siren began to grow, a high and distant note getting closer. It was the sound of justice, slow but relentless. Hear that, Tiffany? That is the sound of the end of your world. You are going to stay here. You aren't going anywhere. You are going to watch them arrive. You are going to watch them fight to save the life you tried to extinguish. You are going to witness your own failure. And afterward, when my mother is safe, I promise you that you are going to know the true meaning of the word hell. The siren was closer now, a sharp lament filling the afternoon air. Tiffany shrank, trapped between her husband's fury and the inevitable sound of reality coming to collect its debt. The peace she had yearned for had turned into the prelude to the most terrible war of her life. The arrival of the paramedics was like breaking an evil spell. Two figures dressed in uniform entered the living room, bringing with them an air of professionalism and urgency that contrasted with the dense atmosphere of hate and despair. They ignored the broken furniture and the mess, focusing solely on the fragile figure of Dorothy. Over here, quick, guided Jason. His voice turned into an instrument of pure efficiency, while the more experienced paramedic began evaluating Dorothy's vitals, placing sensors on her chest and a pulse oximeter on her finger. His partner began the interrogation. Sir, we need to know exactly what happened. I found her like this. Unconscious? Yes. Does she have any chronic illness? High blood pressure, heart problems. She is supposed to take daily medication, said Jason. Every word a veiled accusation toward Tiffany, who watched from her corner, mute and pale. Do you know the names of the medications? Jason hesitated for a second, mind blank from panic. It was Margaret who intervened, voice clear and firm despite the fear. She takes losartan 50 milligrams and metoprolol 100 milligrams, one of each with breakfast. But Mrs. Tiffany. She was in charge of giving them to her, and she hasn't done it in a long time. The paramedic looked up from the monitor, and her gaze crossed with Tiffany's. There was no accusation in her eyes, only a cold, professional evaluation. But for Tiffany, that look was worse than a trial. It was the look of someone beginning to understand the truth. We're going to have to take her immediately. Her pressure is through the floor, and heart rhythm is very irregular. She needs urgent stabilization. As they prepared the stretcher, the noise had attracted the rest of the house staff. The chef, the gardener, the two new cleaning staff, and Haley, the young woman Tiffany had fired, grouped in the vestibule, a silent audience for the drama unfolding. Their faces reflected a mixture of fear and barely disguised satisfaction. The reign of terror of the lady seemed to be coming to an end. When they took Dorothy out on the stretcher, Jason walked beside her, holding her limp hand and whispering in her ear, "I'm coming with you, Mom. I'm not leaving you alone for a second. You're going to be okay." Upon reaching the imposing marble vestibule, in front of the eyes of all his servants, Jason stopped. The paramedics continued toward the door, but he stood still, blocking Tiffany's path as she tried to follow the funeral procession with a fake appearance of concern. "You are not going anywhere," Jason told her, his voice resonating in the acoustics of the grand hall. Then he turned toward his audience of employees. His voice rose clear and strong so no one would miss a single word. "I want all of you to be witnesses. I want you to remember this day. This woman," and he pointed at her with an accusing finger, "this woman who gave you orders, who humiliated you, and who lived comfortably in this house, is a criminal." Tiffany flinched as if slapped. "Jason, please don't do this. Dirty laundry is washed at home." "You are not my home," he replied with ferocity. "My home is wherever my mother is, and you tried to destroy my mother." He turned back to the staff. "I want you to know the truth. She left her to die. She hid her medicine, starved her, tortured her psychologically until she had no will left, all to keep my money. Money earned with the sacrifice of that saintly woman fighting for her life right now." A murmur of horror and indignation ran through the group of employees. The suspicions they had for months, the injustices they had witnessed in silence, suddenly made sense in a monstrous narrative. "Haley," called Jason. The young woman stepped forward, trembling. "Sir? Go up to this woman's room." The word came out with disgust. "Grab the most expensive suitcase you find, the Louis Vuitton she shows off so much, and fill it with whatever. I don't care. Dresses, shoes, whatever. No. You know what? Forget it. Bring 2 trash bags. The biggest ones in the kitchen. It doesn't get more symbolic than this." She treated everyone, especially Dorothy, like garbage. Now, Jason is giving her the only designer luggage she deserves. This is justice, served cold and in a black plastic bag. The order was so brutal, so humiliating, that even the employees gasped. Tiffany looked at him with eyes wide. "You wouldn't dare, Jason. I have designer clothes, jewelry, valuable things. They are mine. Nothing here is yours, Tiffany. Everything was bought with stained money, and now it is cursed. You are going to leave here like what you are. Trash." Haley, with unexpected speed, went up and down in less than 2 minutes. She handed Jason 2 enormous black bags bulging with silks, cashmeres, and leathers, now reduced to a shapeless pile of waste. Jason took the bags and walked toward Tiffany. He threw them at her feet. The sound of plastic against marble was dry and definitive. "There is your severance," he told her. "Now get out." Tiffany stood paralyzed, looking at the bags, then at Jason, then at the impassive faces of the employees. The reality of her situation finally hit her with full force. "No, you can't throw me out like this. I have nowhere to go. My friends, my family. You should have thought of that before trying to commit murder," said Jason, his voice without a shred of mercy. "Call your friends, the ones you bragged to about your perfect life. See how many answer you now." He grabbed her roughly by the arm, the fabric of her gala dress creaking under the pressure of his fingers. He dragged her through the vestibule and opened the enormous double doors of the entrance. He pushed her out into the night that was beginning to fall. "And don't ever come back," he shouted. "My lawyers will handle the divorce. You won't receive a dime split in half. Consider that I am sparing your life by not handing you over to the police right now. Now go." Tiffany stumbled in her heels and fell onto the gravel of the driveway. She lay there, a pathetic figure in her ruined dress, watching the door close in front of her. She tried to get up and run toward the gate, screaming his name, but the huge iron gates had already begun to close with a slow, ominous squeak. She pulled out her cell phone, hands trembling, and dialed Jessica's number. The call went straight to voicemail. She dialed another friend. It rang twice, and then hung up. She realized the news of her disgrace would travel faster than light in her social circle. She was alone, completely alone. She stood in the middle of the driveway of what had been her fortress, now exiled, with 2 trash bags as her only luggage. She watched the ambulance drive away, its red and white lights disappearing in the distance. Those lights didn't just take Dorothy. They took her life, her status, her future, leaving her in a darkness that promised to be eternal. The hospital was a purgatory, a place suspended between life and death, where time was measured in the dripping of intravenous solutions and the rhythm of cardiac monitors. For Jason, every beep of the machine next to his mother's bed was both torture and a blessing. The torture of knowing how fragile her life was, and the blessing of knowing it still beat. The first days in intensive care were a fog of exhaustion, caffeine, and somber conversations with doctors. Technical words swirled in his head. Acute renal failure, severe arrhythmia, electrolyte imbalance. Every term was another brick in the wall of his guilt. The doctor in charge, an older man with a compassionate gaze named Dr. Curtis, was brutally honest. Jason, your mother has suffered systemic abuse. Her body was deprived of the medications it needed to function. It is a miracle she is alive. We are stabilizing her, but the road to recovery will be long and difficult. She will need patience and a lot of willpower. Do whatever is necessary, doctor. I don't care about the cost. Bring the best specialists in the world if necessary. The best specialist she can have right now, Jason, is her son. The will to live often depends on having a reason to do so. That conversation was a turning point for Jason. He understood he couldn't buy his mother's health, couldn't delegate her recovery. He had to earn it. His empire, which had been the center of his universe, shrank until it became a footnote in the story of his life. When Dorothy was moved to a private room, Jason organized his life around that small space. He rejected the idea of hiring private nurses for the night shifts. "I'm staying," he said, and turned the uncomfortable recliner into his command post. Calls from his office were answered with a brusqueness that disconcerted his partners. "Robert, I don't care about the German offer. Tell them no. Yes. Do whatever you want. I have to give my mom her soup." He would hang up the phone and take the tray with hospital chicken broth. With patience he never knew he possessed, he fed Dorothy spoonful by spoonful, blowing on each one so it wouldn't burn, just as she had done for him 30 years ago. Dorothy's recovery wasn't a straight upward line, but a series of small advances and painful setbacks. There were days she was lucid and chatty, and days when confusion and weakness plunged her into apathetic silence. On those dark days, Jason felt panic gripping him again. He would sit by her side and read to her. Not stock market reports, but the Danielle Steele novels he found in the hospital gift shop, the same ones his mother devoured in her youth. His voice, normally assertive and commanding, softened reading stories of love and heartbreak, and sometimes, in the middle of a paragraph, Dorothy would smile weakly. Those small smiles were the fuel keeping Jason standing. One afternoon, while a physical therapist helped Dorothy move her legs to avoid atrophy, Jason watched from a corner. He saw the effort on his mother's face, the sweat on her forehead from a movement that used to be automatic. The therapist was kind, but firm. "Come on, Miss Dorothy, one more. You are strong." He saw his mother close her eyes and push, a moan escaping her lips. In that moan, Jason heard the echo of all the sacrifices of her life. The pain of that afternoon wasn't just physical. It was the pain of a body and spirit pushed to the limit. And guilt hit him again, with the force of a wave. That night he couldn't sleep. The image of his mother suffering repeated in his mind. He had a nightmare. He dreamed he was back in the living room, but this time he was sitting in the armchair next to Tiffany, toasting while his mother vanished in the chair. He woke up with a stifled scream, bathed in cold sweat. Dorothy, who was dozing, woke up with his scream. "My son, what's wrong?" A nightmare. Jason, eyes wide with the terror of the dream, knelt by the bed. He needed to confess. He needed to get out the poison consuming him from inside. "Mom," his voice was a broken whisper. "It was my fault. Everything was my fault. We already talked about this, my boy. No, you don't understand. It's not just that I was blind. It's that I didn't want to see. It was easier to believe her. It was more comfortable. Every time you called me, a part of me, a selfish and horrible part, got annoyed. I thought, my mom again with her complaints, interrupting my day, my work. I turned you into a nuisance in my own head, Mom, and that is unforgivable. I left you alone. I left you at her mercy, because it was convenient for me. And I almost lost you. I almost lost you forever because of my selfishness. He rested his head on the mattress, body shaken by silent, deep sobs. He wasn't asking for forgiveness because he felt he didn't deserve it. He was simply exposing the naked truth of his shame. Dorothy remained silent for a long time, simply stroking his hair. There was no judgment in her touch, only infinite compassion. "When you were little," she said finally, her voice soft as velvet, "you fell from the oak tree in the yard. You broke your arm. You cried and cried, not so much from the pain, but because you had disobeyed me. I had told you not to climb. And while the doctor put the cast on, you wouldn't stop saying, 'Forgive me, Mom, forgive me.'" Jason raised his head, eyes red and swollen. "And do you know what I answered you?" She continued. "I told you, a broken arm heals, son, a scare passes, but a mother's love for her son, that never breaks." She held his face between her fragile but firm hands. "My love for you isn't broken, Jason. It was a little bruised, a little sad, but it never broke. The past is gone. Let it go. Look at me. I am here. You are here. That is the only thing that matters. Let's start over, both of us. This is the real strength, isn't it? Not the fury or the revenge, but this, the power to forgive, the grace to heal. That is the love that Tiffany could never understand. And it's the love that finally saved them both. The healing has begun, but the story isn't quite finished. His mother's forgiveness wasn't a magic balm that erased his scars, but it was the permission he needed to start forgiving himself. He stayed there kneeling until the sun began to rise, feeling how her love, a love he didn't deserve, but was freely given, began to fill the holes guilt had dug in his soul. Reconstruction had begun. The months that followed were a whirlwind of activity with a single purpose: to build a new world for Dorothy. Jason, the man who moved capital and built corporate empires, now dedicated all his energy and resources to building a refuge. The first time he visited the old farmhouse he had bought in the countryside, the walls were peeling paint. The central yard was a sea of dry weeds, and the wooden beams of the porch groaned with every gust of wind. But Jason didn't see the ruin. He saw the potential. He saw a place where his mother could breathe again. He got personally involved in the renovation, to the surprise of the architects and local contractors. This was not a construction project. It was an act of atonement. They often saw him there, sleeves rolled up, covered in dust, arguing not about profit margins, but about the color of the tiles for the kitchen. He insisted on wide, accessible doorways, not just for her physical needs, but as a psychological rejection of the prison she had been in. He demanded the kitchen be the heart of the house, with bright, open windows, a place where nothing could be hidden. Every nail driven was a strike against the past. Every coat of paint, a layer of healing over the old wounds. He wasn't just building a house. He was rebuilding her world, and in doing so, his own. He insisted the backyard have a stone fountain, and that the kitchen be the heart of the house, with a large stove and a wooden table big enough for a whole family. The day he finally took Dorothy to see her new home was a day of radiant Sunday. She had regained much of her strength, though she walked with a slight hesitation, a permanent reminder of her ordeal. When the car stopped in front of the large wooden gate of the ranch, she was speechless. "What is this, my son?" she asked, eyes scanning the freshly painted walls of a warm cream color and pots of geraniums overflowing with color. "It's your house, Mom. Welcome home." When they crossed the threshold and entered the yard, Dorothy let out a gasp. The sound of water running in the fountain, the smell of jasmine and bougainvillea in full bloom, the sunlight filtering through the roof, it all hit her at once. Margaret was there to receive her with a smile spanning her whole face, surrounded by the new staff, local people, kind and familiar faces. That day they organized a small welcome party. Not an ostentatious party like Tiffany's, but a meal in the yard, a barbecue, pot beans, freshly made food. The local people came to greet Miss Dorothy, to welcome her. She, sitting at the head of the long wooden table, laughed, told stories, gave blessings. She was no longer the prisoner of the ivory tower. She was the queen of her own kingdom, a kingdom of earth, sun, and genuine affection. Life found a new rhythm, one dictated by the seasons and not the stock market clock. Jason found a peace money had never given him. He discovered the pleasure of waking up with the roosters, drinking coffee on the porch while watching his mother water her rose bushes, getting his hands dirty helping in the garden. His work now consisted of a few hours a day in his study managing investments, a job that allowed him to be present, something he had forgotten how to do. One afternoon, months after the move, the scene was of almost pictorial beauty. The sun was setting, dyeing the sky in violet and orange tones. Dorothy rocked gently in her favorite rocking chair on the porch, with a basket of dried herbs in her lap. Jason was sitting on the steps at her feet, cleaning an old gardening tool. "The air feels good, right, son?" said Dorothy, breaking the silence. "It smells like wet earth, like life." "Yes, Mom, it feels good," he replied, his voice full of a calm previously alien to him. They fell silent again, listening to the sound of the crickets beginning their nightly song. "I've been thinking a lot, Mom," said Jason finally, putting the tool aside. "About everything. About the promise I made you as a child." Dorothy looked at him tenderly. "The one about the castle?" "Yes. I was so obsessed with fulfilling it, with giving you luxuries, with showing the world I had made it, that I built the absolute wrong thing. I gave you wealth, but I took away your joy. I gave you a huge house, but I stole your home. Chasing a silly boy's dream, I almost destroyed the only person who made that dream possible." He got on his knees in front of her, a gesture that had become natural for him, a gesture of devotion and respect. He took her hands, those hands that had worked so hard and were now soft from rest. "This place, Mom, this land, this sun, this peace, this is the true luxury. I built an empire for strangers so my name would appear in magazines, but I forgot to build a paradise for you. Forgive me for being such a foolish architect. This is your kingdom, Mom, the one you should have always had." Dorothy caressed his cheek, eyes shining with tears that were no longer of pain, but of happiness so deep it was almost sacred. "Oh, my son, my only kingdom, my only paradise, has always been and will always be your heart," she told him, voice soft but firm. "And believe me, my son, since you came back to me, I have been living in the most beautiful place in the universe." She pulled him toward her in a tight hug, a hug smelling of love, forgiveness, and fertile earth. He buried his face in her lap, the most powerful man in the world, finding his only true refuge in his mother's love. This process wasn't about forgetting. Jason would forever carry the scar of his own blindness, a chilling reminder of the price of neglect. Forgiveness, he learned, wasn't about erasing the past, but about learning to live with it without letting it strangle the present. By caring for his mother every day, he wasn't just atoning. He was also slowly forgiving himself. The pain was still there, but it was now enveloped by a profound peace and an infinite gratitude. Their story of redemption is a powerful reminder. If you were moved by this journey, subscribe to our channel so you don't miss other meaningful stories.